but not yet. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We will be getting started at 12:30 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Hi, everybody. Welcome. We'll be getting started shortly at 12:30.
All right. Hi, Yossi. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. We're going to get started in approximately 4 minutes. Just letting folks into the session.
לא לפחד להתאהב, שישבר הלב, לא לפחד בדרך לאבד. לקום כל בוקר ולצאת אל החיים ולנסות הכל לפני שיגמר. לחפש מאיפה באנו ולחזור בסוף תמיד להתחלה. למצוא בכל דבר עוד יופי ולרקוד עד שנופלים מעייפות או אהבה. מכל הרגעים בזמן למצוא אחד לאחוז בו, להגיד שהגענו. תמיד לזכור לרגע לעצור ולהודות על מה שיש ומאיפה שבאנו. לחבק אותה בלילה, כשהיא נרדמת אז כל העולם נרגע. לנשום אותה עמוק, לדעת שתמיד אני אהיה שם בשבילה. לא לפחד להתאהב, שישבר הלב, לא לפחד בדרך לאבד. לקום כל בוקר ולצאת אל החיים ולנסות הכל לפני שיגמר. לחפש מאיפה באנו ולחזור בסוף תמיד להתחלה. למצוא בכל דבר עוד יופי ולרקוד עד שנופלים מעייפות או אהבה. מכל הרגעים בזמן למצוא אחד לאחוז בו.
Start in 1 minute.
רגע לעצור ולהודות על מה שיש ובאיפה שבאנו. לחבק אותה בלילה, כשהיא נרדמת אז כל העולם נרגע. לנשום אותה עמוק לדעת שתמיד אני אהיה שם בשבילה. לחפש מאיפה באנו ולחזור בסוף תמיד להתחלה. למצוא בכל דבר עוד יופי ולרקוד.
Just a couple of more, maybe 30 more seconds for more of our folks to join in, and we'll get started.
מכל הרגעים בזמן למצוא אחד לאחור בו, להגיד שהגענו. תמיד לזכור לרגע לעצור ולהודות על מה שיש ובאיפה שבאנו. לחבק אותה בלילה, כשהיא נרדמת אז כל העולם נרגע. לנשום אותה עמוק לדעת שתמיד אני אהיה שם בשבילה. מכל הרגעים בזמן למצוא אחד לאחור, להגיד שהגענו. תמיד לזכור לרגע לעצור ולהודות על מה שיש ואיפה שבאנו.
Great to see our friends joining us. Thank you. So lucky to have Glenn Richter with us, which is really amazing. All right. Just okay. So let's get started to and then I'm sure folks will join us as I get ourselves into this conversation. Okay, there we go. Beautiful. So thank you all for being here. This is an amazing group of people that's together. You can hear me well? Yeah. Okay. Great. So thank you so much. I'm Ilya Bratman, and I'm lucky to be here to welcome my friend and great teacher, Yossi Klein Halevi, to speak to us today. And I'm very lucky to be here for many reasons, and we have lots of folks to thank who are here. We want to say thank you to all the students who are here, and especially those who are part of our wonderful iLounge Global Israel Educational Fellowship. We're so glad to have students from across New York City, the students from St. Petersburg, which is really exciting, and there are students from Haifa as well. So we have an international, literally very global attendance today. We are also incredibly lucky to co-host this amazing event with CAFI, the CUNY Alliance for Inclusion, which is an incredible coalition of faculty, staff, and students and community members at CUNY, City University of New York in New York City, which is the biggest urban university in America, with almost 400,000 students attending our great university. So we are very lucky to be here together with a number of amazing faculty. And CAFI, which is an amazing new organization that's fighting to promote civil discourse and academic integrity on our campuses, and to really set the record straight, and to fight against biases on our campuses, and really present the truth as well as we can, and to do that effectively and communally and in an inclusive way. So it's really exciting that we're able to do that and to bring a series of speakers throughout the semester and on. And our first really is Yossi Klein Halevi, who is an incredible way to begin. So we will get started, and the hope for today is that we'll have a conversation with Yossi, who is going to really share with us some amazing thoughts that he has had over the years, and specifically we'll connect it to some of the incredible things he's written. So first, who is Yossi Klein Halevi? So Yossi Klein Halevi is an incredible author and scholar who is currently a senior scholar at the Shalom Hartman Institute and a co-leader of the Muslim Leadership Institute at the Shalom Hartman, where with his colleagues, he leads a program where they bring Muslim leaders from the United States to really learn about Jewish culture and tradition and Israel in Jerusalem. It's really exciting. Yossi is an author, a prolific author who's written in dozens of different publications, including New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. And he's also written a number of amazing books, which I'm lucky to have read, which is very exciting. And this one was my first, Memoirs of a Jewish Extremist. And this, as I tell Yossi all the time, changed my life. As a Russian-speaking Jew, I really connected to this story, which I unfortunately didn't know much about. So, why are the Russian-speaking Jews, how we got here to America, and in many ways, I'm very thankful to Yossi for this story. His acclaimed, amazing story of like dreamers about a platoon of soldiers who came to liberate Jerusalem after 2,000 years of not being there. So it's pretty exciting. We are, this book was a National Jewish Book Award winner, and it now has become an incredibly best-selling novel. And his most recent book, Letters to a Palestinian Neighbor, this wonderful book has also become a bestseller, and we will focus today on this book and the stories that come out of this, and how Yossi was able to connect with Palestinian neighbors, his Palestinian neighbors, and how what he had learned from this and what he can teach us. Yossi has been speaking to groups across the world, and I am lucky to have learned with Yossi 2 summers in Shalom Hartman many years ago. And without further ado, Yossi Klein Halevi, take it away and give us a little bit of perspective first, why and how you would like to shape our understanding. And I'll just start you off with a question, if I may, so that we can kind of understand the idea of where you were coming from when you were writing this book, The Letters. And I was thinking, to ask you, what were you thinking the perspective of a Palestinian would be? Did you think it had changed from what you thought it would be? Do you think it has evolved? Were you shocked by some of the correspondence and some of the responses from your Palestinian neighbors, or were you not shocked? And what most have you learned from this perspective? And just final thought, also, if you can add to what critics sometimes say to your book, okay, who say we are constantly looking to give the other side space for their narrative, right? The Palestinian narrative. They're never looking to give us space, embrace our narrative, allow our narrative to be spoken. Why are you, allowing the space and giving space for a Palestinian narrative? And how do you feel that this is promoting either peace or coexistence and growth of our both communities? So just those questions, if you can start us off with, and then just for all of our friends, if you have questions, put them in the chat and we will try to get to them as well. Thank you so much. Go ahead. You're mute. Maybe Yael has to unmute you. Yep, there you go.
Thank you, Ilya. Thanks very much. Wonderful to be back with you, and thanks for all the great work that you do, and you and your colleagues. So you've asked some pretty big questions, and I'd like to take a step back and try to make some order out of those important questions, and start with what my approach to writing generally is, my approach to telling the Jewish story. Because what this book is, for those of you who aren't familiar with the letters to My Palestinian Neighbor book, it's a series of letters that I wrote to an imaginary Palestinian neighbor on the hill across from where I live in Jerusalem. I live in a neighborhood called French Hill, which is the northeastmost neighborhood before the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, the territories, whatever you feel like calling it. And from my porch, I see two Palestinian villages literally on the next hill. And I began writing late one night, thanks to insomnia. I began writing a letter to someone who I imagine was having insomnia on the next hill, looking at the lights in my room as I was looking out at the lights of theirs, and trying to explain who the Jews are, why we returned home, why we believe this is our home, a home that we share with another people, and how might we begin to try to reconcile. Now, at the same time, I conceived of this as an invitation to Palestinians to respond and tell me their stories. And when the book was published, and I noticed, Ilya, you had the first edition of the book only contained my letters. They were translated into Arabic. I placed it on the internet for free downloading in Arabic. And I invited Palestinians to respond. And hundreds did respond. Hundreds wrote to me. Several thousand downloaded the book. And the responses ranged from gratitude to anger to hatred to threats, the full range. I was not surprised by the hatred. I've lived in Israel now for 40 years. I live in this conflict. I've experienced this conflict in many ways, as a citizen, as a soldier, as a journalist, as a reconciliation activist. And so I've gone in and out of these multiple roles in my relationship to the Palestinians and to this conflict. And so I certainly expected enmity. What I didn't expect, or didn't really allow myself to expect, was engagement. I was hoping, of course, that I would get letters that would be willing to engage with me as an Israeli. And to my surprise, I did receive letters, thoughtful letters, people who disagreed with me passionately, but were ready to engage with me on what I considered to be the essential prerequisite for a respectful conversation, even a respectful disagreement between Palestinians and Israelis. And any conversation that we have will be a disagreement over who's responsible for the refugee tragedy of 1948, which side is responsible for the collapse of the Oslo peace process. We can't agree on the most basic interpretations of the same set of facts. And so I expected disagreement. I was hoping, as I say, to get more of an engagement from some people. And those letters really did arrive, along with some of the other less surprising letters. And what I was really hoping for was a conversation that I could model, even with a few Palestinians, based on the prerequisite that this is a conflict between two legitimate narratives, two peoples that find themselves entwined in a very small and traumatized piece of land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. Each people believes, with justice from its perspective that all of this land between the river and the sea belongs by right to them. Certainly for me, as a Jew, I regard all of this little land as the land of Israel. And Palestinians regard the same little piece of land as the land of Palestine. And so my starting point is we're two peoples, each of whom can make a compelling case, again, from its own perspective, about why this land belongs to them. And the dialogue partners that I was seeking on the Palestinian side were people who, again, would disagree with me about everything, but would agree with me on this basic premise, that both peoples are indigenous to this land. And for the last 100 years, we've been trying to erase each other's stories, to deny each other's narrative, to expose the lie of the other side's narrative. And just as neither people is going away, neither narrative is going away either. And so I wanted to construct a conversation, a respectful disagreement around mutually exclusive narratives with one essential agreement, which is that both peoples belong to this land. And I did find Palestinians who were willing to model that kind of conversation. I chose what I considered to be the best, the most effective, the most compelling letters that I received from Palestinians. And I collected those and placed them as an epilogue in the paperback edition of the book. And Ilya, if you don't have that, I'll be happy to send you the epilogue so you can have those letters and maybe distribute those to people. Because for me, that's now the heart of this book. There are my letters laying out the Zionist narrative, and then there are the Palestinian letters that respond and present their narrative. Now, the most difficult decision that I had to make in rolling out the book was, do I let the Palestinian letters stand as the last word in the book, or do I respond to their responses? Now, the obvious temptation for me was to respond to their letters. This is, after all, a book that I wrote to defend the Israeli story, which is under systematic attack, as we all know. And I wanted to present a narrative of my people. And so to leave the reader with the Palestinian counter-narrative was taking a big risk. And the risk was that the reader who may not know that much about the conflict would say, well, you know, here's the last word in this book, and it's the Palestinian narrative. Makes sense. Maybe they're right. In the end, I decided not to respond to those letters, even though in my personal relationship with all of these letter writers, of course, I did respond. But in the book, I made a very difficult, but I feel necessary decision to allow the Palestinian counter-narratives the last word. Now, this is countercultural to this moment, politically. And not only in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, in political discourse in America, and here I don't have to tell you, and I don't know much beyond what I read about political discourse in Russia, but I have a sneaking suspicion that it's not particularly a respectful political discourse of disagreement there either. And so a civil disagreement is increasingly hard to find over politics anywhere. And the tendency today is to defeat your political opponent, to expose, to ridicule. You don't grant your political opponent any advantage, certainly not the last word in your own book. And the reason that I decided to really go against the stream here and to give my ideological opponent the last word in my book was, first of all, to honor those Palestinians who had the courage to respond to me and had the decency to really engage me in a respectful conversation, and to signal to my Palestinian readers that I'm serious about trying to model a new kind of conversation between us. The other reason why I decided to give Palestinians the last word in this book is because I wanted to signal to Jewish readers a certain self-confidence. There's a panic that is setting in large parts of the American Jewish community about how do we respond to the Palestinian narrative. And what I'm implicitly saying by giving the Palestinians the last word in this book is, everyone calm down. We have a very powerful story. Let's learn our story. Let's learn how to tell our story. First of all, to ourselves, because I'm not sure that many Jews know how to articulate the story to ourselves. And then in conversation, in dialogue, in debate, if necessary. And we don't have to worry about the power of our story. We need to own our story. We need to stand with confidence in our narrative, to love our story, and then reach out to the counter narrative and those on the other side who will be willing to engage with us. We're here for that conversation. And those who are not willing to, I will engage in other ways. I spoke recently on a campus in the Midwest, and when the talk began, 40 pro-Palestinian demonstrators stood up and turned their backs to me and held up signs saying no normalization with genocide, and walked out. Now, obviously, there is no place for conversation with them. But when I say that I'm trying to signal self-confidence to Jewish readers and goodwill to Palestinian readers, what I'm really saying is that I had two audiences in mind for this book. My first and most significant audience were my Palestinian neighbors. And my second audience were diaspora Jews, young diaspora Jews who need to relearn a language. I would call it a 21st century language about Zionism, about Israel, because in many ways we're still telling a 20th century language about Zionism that begins with the pogroms in Tsarist Russia and culminates in the Holocaust. That is an old story of Israel that is increasingly irrelevant in the 21st century. The story of Israel that I believe we need to tell today is a 4,000-year story of deep rootedness, of a people that never forgot the land that it lost, never gave up on the land that it lost, and continued to maintain what I would call a kind of vicarious, long-distance indigenousness, rootedness in the land that it had lost, but believed that it would one day return to. Now, this is a very strange story. I would even call it, I would go so far as to say, it's a bizarre story. And yet this is our story. It actually, not only are we the only people in history that didn't forget its lost land for 2,000 years, that turned that land into the core of its religious and collective identity and national identity. But even more strangely, 2,000 years later, we actually did return from 100 countries around the world. from the lowest point in our history, which was the Shoah, the 1940s, and managed to not only create a state, but manage the transition from the worst point in our history to what I regard as today the peak moment in Jewish history. I know that's a big statement, but I believe this is the ultimate moment in Jewish history. We have never been more powerful. We've never been more central on the world stage. The world has never been more interested in what the Jewish people has to say, not always in good ways, I grant you. Our centrality is a very complicated mix of interest and attack and demonization. Nevertheless, the Jewish people has never been more important in world history, I believe, than at this moment. What we're lacking is a language in which to tell this story. And my job as a writer, as a Jewish writer, is to try to find the language for our story. And that's what I've really tried to do as a writer throughout my career. And this book is an attempt to tell our story, first of all, to Palestinians, who are the most difficult audience for the Israeli story, certainly the most hostile audience, the audience that has suffered because of our return home. We didn't intend for that to happen. That's how it played out. And I have a need, after 100 years of conflict, I have a need to try to reach out and explain my story to my neighbors. But at the same time, I also have a deep need to try to explain our story to ourselves. And this book really tries to do both of those very difficult tasks simultaneously. So I think that I'm going to stop now and open for conversation.
Amazing. Thank you. And I love that framing. And I want to push you a little bit on that to talk specifically about one of your audiences, right? The Jewish audience. And in many of your writings, you speak and write about the yearning of the Jewish people, this 4,000 or 2,000-year-old yearning to return, to have this place. And like Dreamers, of course, is kind of like a culmination of that journey in many ways, right? And this is incredible, right? When the Jewish people have the yearning and have the desire and have a goal, it is extraordinary. It's exciting. We get to come home. Now, though, right? Where do we find, do you think, the passion for Israel or for the story, right? With the diaspora Jews, right? Where the apathy and the disconnection with the Holocaust and the old story that you said, from the pogroms to the Holocaust, or the older story, the 4,000-year-old story, right? The complete disconnection to either of those stories in our diaspora Jewry, or the Israeli Jewry, who doesn't have the yearning anymore, right? There's no more yearning. We've made it. It's done. There's no more that desire, passion to return. How do you then position that? How do we incite and infuse and enliven that spark that maybe is so dull at this point?
So it's really interesting because I think it's a great question. And I was thinking of, as you were speaking, of something that Natan Sharansky once said, which is that the generation of the founders built the state, the physical infrastructure of the state, and our generation needs to rebuild the Jewish people. Now, I would add that it's actually more complicated than that, because the founders of the state of Israel didn't quite realize this, but they were actually creating or recreating two peoples. First, they were recreating the Jewish people. For 2,000 years, we had the consciousness of being a people, but we were scattered in such a geographical spread that we really didn't know each other. Jewish communities really had very little connection between East and West. There was some connection, but we certainly didn't function as a living people. We functioned as separate communities. And Zionism, by bringing the Jewish people back in intimate proximity in a small space, has recreated the Jewish people, which has reverberated around the world. Today, and of course, thanks to globalization and media, we're able, thanks to what we're doing tonight on Zoom, we're able to function as a people again. But Zionism also did something that I think its founders weren't fully conscious of, and that is that it created a new people called the Israelis. Now, obviously, there's great overlap between the Jewish people and the Israeli people, but these two peoples are by no means identical. There are many Jews who are not citizens of Israel, and there are many citizens of Israel who aren't Jews. And so Israel's challenge is to be functioning on two levels simultaneously. We are the center point that is responsible for a global Jewish people, and we are a small country in the Middle East that has a particular national identity called Israeli. And so in that sense, we really have a dual responsibility. And so when we talk about rebuilding the Jewish people, I would also add we need to start building an Israeli people at the same time, not at the expense of one or the other, simultaneously. And there are many, many open questions here. What is the place of 20% of Arab Israelis in Israeli identity? What is the place of the 13% of the ultra-Orthodox in Israeli identity? The two fastest growing populations in Israel are the ultra-Orthodox and Arab Israelis, and these are the two populations that are most outside the shared mainstream ethos of Zionist Israel. So the challenges that we're facing are overwhelming. And I believe, and again, I'm speaking as a writer, but I believe that an essential component in trying to help us rebuild the Jewish people, a global Jewish people, and begin seriously building an Israeli identity runs through narrative. It runs through story. Who are we? What is our story? We've been carrying a 4,000-year story. What does it mean? What is this story about? Why has this story been so important to us that we held on to it under the most impossible circumstances? Why? Is it just ethnic pride or national belonging, or as we say in Hebrew or Yiddish, same word, dafka, in spite? Okay, maybe our parents, my father was a Holocaust survivor. Maybe he wanted to remain a Jew to spite Hitler, but that's not a strong enough identity. And so the question really for us is what is our story? And I have a particular professional responsibility. My job is to sit in a room and try to write our story. But all of us who carry this story have a responsibility to ask that question, and not only once a year at the Seder. This is a core question of being a 21st century Jew. What is this story about? And why does this story matter? Why does this story matter to me? Why is this story important to the world? It seems to be. The world is obsessed with the Jews, for better or for worse. Ask people around the world how many Jews there are, and people will tell you, oh, there are probably 1 billion Jews in the world, 500 million, 100 million for sure. And there's something about our story that is central to being human. But we need to start asking ourselves what this story means, and we need to start taking responsibility. We need to start going deeper into our story.
Amazing. Thank you. And there's been amazing questions coming in, and I'm going to try to curate them in a second. But selfishly, I want to ask one more question from me. So I, as a former Soviet Union Jew, I, as I told you, like the memoirs of the Jewish extremists, I really connected with. And I'll tell you why it connects to what you're saying, what you're speaking about, is, we had multiple times in our history that we all united around something, right? We united around the Holocaust, maybe. We united around the Soviet Jewry, maybe. You guys did, and as Yossi, you always say, you're a Brooklyn boy, and you went to Brooklyn College, one of our wonderful CUNY institutions here. And the idea of what you have done here in America to help free Soviet Jewry. By the way, we didn't know about the Soviet Jews, so thank you. We only found out once we came here.
I'm happy to have personally brought you to
absolutely had personally brought me in, and you being fighting and protesting in Moscow in embassies, that definitely made a difference. But the idea of you, the American Jewry, coalescing around an issue was tremendous, was extraordinary. That was the last time, I think, ever 250,000 Jews gathered somewhere together. It was extraordinary. I think in 1987, when Gorbachev visited the White House. And now the question is there anything that maybe ever or again that we could coalesce around as an American Jewry, a diaspora Jewry, Israeli Jewry, any Jewry, or all together? Is there going to be that moment, or are we really in a difficult moment where there is, nothing that maybe unites us, and therefore we are so disunited that it is very difficult to tell that narrative, to create that story? And as an expert writer, even for you, it might be difficult. So what do you think? Is there future unity for us?
So first of all, if we're talking about the Soviet Jewry movement, I would like to greet Glenn Richter, who's on this call. And Ilya, if there's anyone you should thank for getting you out of the Soviet Union, it's Glenn Richter. He's one of the seminal figures who helped found the movement and was there from day one to the last day of the movement. I also want to greet my friend, Professor Larry Amsel, who I saw was on the call. Larry is an old friend and colleague from the Soviet Jewry movement as well. And so to your question, one of the most painful and disorienting features of Jewish life today is that there is nothing that unites us anymore. It used to be the Soviet Jewry movement. It used to be Israel. It used to be anti-Semitism. We can't even agree on who is an anti-Semite anymore. Is Steve Bannon an anti-Semite? Well, if you're on the Jewish left, you think so. If you're on the Jewish right, that's Steve Bannon is not the problem. Anti-Semitism, the problem of anti-Semitism is coming from Linda Sarsour and the anti-Zionist left. So we can't even define threat anymore. And a people that can't agree on the most minimal perception of threat is a people that's really in danger of losing its most basic commonality. And that's where we are now. And it's a very dangerous place to be in. There are multiple fault lines, multiple schisms within Israeli society, within the diaspora, between Israel and American Jewry in particular. And this really would take us, a week-long seminar to discuss the state of the Jewish people today. And I'm actually working on a book about this now, about the present and future of the Jewish people. And How do we deal with navigate our increasingly schismatic, pathological tendencies? Because there's, the Jewish people is unique in the ability to overcome catastrophe. And we also, I don't know if we're unique in this, but we have a great ability to create an internal catastrophe, to bring catastrophe on ourselves. That's also a pattern of Jewish history. And we are at a moment now where we need to ask ourselves a very difficult question. And that is, what does it mean to be a survivor people? A people that has survived its own end, its own apocalypse, and not only survived, but managed to turn our apocalypse into a victory, into a kind of redemption. And there's no other people that I can think of that's done that. What does it mean, though, to own that story? What does it mean to be a survivor? And by a survivor, I don't only mean that we're a people that went through trauma. More importantly, is we're a people that overcame trauma. And if you think about the verse in the Haggadah, the line in the Haggadah, in the Passover Haggadah, which says that you need to, each of us needs to see oneself as if we personally left Egypt. Now, it doesn't say, Matt, you need to see yourself as if you were a slave in Egypt. We're supposed to remember the slavery, but we don't place ourselves in the slavery. We place ourselves in the aftermath of slavery, in those first steps of freedom. That's where the Haggadah wants Jewish consciousness to thrive. That we are a people that overcame Egypt. And so if I were to apply that to a contemporary Jewish identity, we are not commanded to imagine ourselves as if I were in Auschwitz, but I am commanded to see myself as if I left Auschwitz, as if I were a Jew in 1945 and 1946, not in 1944. I can't imagine being a Jew in 1944. I can imagine being a post-Holocaust Jew because I am a post-Holocaust Jew. And where I became a contemporary with my father was not in the Holocaust. The Holocaust belonged to him. But the post-Holocaust identity belonged to both of us. Now, what does it mean then for us to be a survivor people? A people that has had the wisdom and the strength to overcome the ultimate victimhood, to the point where we are so much not victims anymore that we can start turning on each other, start turning against each other. I want us to re-own the Jewish identity of 1945. And that's why the book that I'm writing now begins the day after the war in 1945.
Awesome. I'm super looking forward to this new book. It's going to be amazing. So we have some questions from the audience that I'd love to curate for you and have the participants ask themselves. And, I'd love to have a variety of folks who are here with us. So we're going to start with Gabrielle Friedman, who is a wonderful City College student, so part of our wonderful CUNY community. And we'd love Gabriella to ask her question. Go ahead. Oh, muted, I guess, or can't hear you. Yael will unmute you or make you louder. Try it again.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for coming to speak with us, and thank you, Ilya, for setting all of this up. I recently finished Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor and found it very difficult to read the epilogue. I grew up in a community where basically I only heard the Jewish narrative. And when I was reading the epilogue, I felt a lot of cognitive dissonance almost, almost feeling like maybe I was brainwashed growing up and that there's a lot of truth to what they're saying. And I ended up kind of regaining my confidence in the Jewish narrative, but there's still a little bit of that dissonance and sometimes confusion between, who's more truthful, who's more right. And almost to the point where, like, I feel like I can't accept any wrongdoings of the Israeli government, because then it's accepting the truth of the other side, or accepting that maybe I'm not right. And so I want to know what your suggestion is to kind of answer this conflict between in my brain, between like how to fit both narratives.
Well, Gabriella, I have to tell you that what you've said has just reinforced for me the intuition that I had to write this book in the way that I did and include those letters, because my hope was, I'm looking at different audiences. One of the audiences are young American Jews who grew up in the Orthodox community in a religious Zionist atmosphere where there is no other narrative. But then you go off to college and you're going to encounter that other narrative, whether you want to or not. That narrative is out there, it's all around us, and we have to confront it. And so the process that you described, that you went through, was fantastic. You read those letters, they really challenged you, and they are challenging. And you went through an initial period of shattering and wondering, maybe my narrative was a lie. And then you begin the process of integration and saying, okay, my story is right, but there are other pieces here that I didn't know and I need to deal with. Now, some of the points that the Palestinian respondents raise, I agree with. Other points, many points, probably most, I deeply disagree with. But that is part of the process of education that we need to go through, because we don't have a clue as a community how to really effectively deal with this narrative. And dealing with this narrative is not just getting the right talking points down. It's really deeply confronting the Palestinian narrative. What's true there? What's distorted? What do I think is true? And what you and I think is true or false might be different, but we need to start facing this narrative. And I was hoping that by writing this book and giving young Jews, first of all, a firm foundation in the Israeli narrative, and then presenting the Palestinian narrative, you'd be able to handle it. And Gabriella, you've proven my point. So thank you. I saw a question that came up from David, which Ilya, if I can just answer, because I thought it was a fantastic question. I really appreciated it, which is that what I'm saying now about owning our identity as a survivor people is the opposite of what I said at the beginning of my talk about the outmoded 20th century identity. So let me say two points here. First of all, in terms of a 20th century Holocaust-centered identity for Zionism, I do believe that in how we present the Israeli story to the world, that is no longer useful. If anything, it's counterproductive, because what people will now say to us is, why should the Palestinians have paid the price for what Europe did to the Jews in the 20th century? And so the Zionist narrative that I tell in the Letters book is a story of longing. It's not primarily a story of refuge, of need, but a story of longing for a land that we belong to. It's a story of indigenousness. And it's also a story, and I saw somebody else raise this, it's also a story that's not European. A majority of Jews in Israel come from families to one extent or another that have roots in the Middle East. Now, I say to one extent or another because there's so much in-marrying, what we call in Israel intermarriage, between Mizrahim and Ashkenazim. It's become so commonplace that it's really hard to tell what percentage of Israelis are Ashkenazi or Mizrahi. It's losing its meaning the more the generations go on. But there's another point here, which is there's an internal Jewish conversation on identity, not the external conversation that we need to have about Israel, how we explain Israel to the world, but how we explain what's happened to us as a people over the last century. And there, the Holocaust is right in the center. But not, again, what's relevant, I think, for this generation, especially your generation far more than mine. What's relevant for young Jews today is not primarily the fact that we went through that trauma, but that we overcame the trauma. And that's a different story. That's telling the story differently. That's telling a story of strength and not a story of victimhood. You know, when the intersectional ideologues, and for listeners in St. Petersburg, my apologies for having this very American conversation right now, but the intersectionality is a very big idea now, especially on American campuses. And intersectionality is essentially creating a hierarchy of victimhood, and that you create identities based on victimhood. And in the intersectional universe, Jews are having a very hard time being accepted. And I personally celebrate the exclusion of the Jews from the intersectional world because we don't belong there. We rejected victimhood. The essence of the 20th, 21st century Jewish experience is a rejection of the identity of victimhood. And so when the ideologues of intersectionality say that the Jews don't belong there because we're powerful, I own that. And that's a source for me, certainly as the son of a Holocaust survivor. That's the source of one of the most powerful parts of my Jewish identity, that we are not victims.
So on that note, like there's a great question from one of our wonderful participants from Russia, who, as he said, in St. Petersburg might have a different perspective. And the Ilya Kharkovsky will ask his question about threat. And if you can join us, my namesake Ilya, and ask the question about anti-Semitism threat, if you can, please. If Yael can, yep, go ahead.
Hey, well, thank you for this opportunity, first of all. I was just wondering if you think that, well, you just talked about the hierarchy of victimhood, and I was wondering if you think that having a threat and uniting against this threat is crucial for us to keep our national or ethnic identity. Thank you.
Say it again. What is crucial to keep our identity?
Has to unmute.
I didn't.
Yeah, there you go.
Is having a threat.
Yeah.
Well,
the good news is that we do have a threat. Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah. No worries that the Jewish people won't be facing existential threats anytime soon. But that's not enough. Obviously, it's not enough because we're not holding together. It's not holding us together. And so I think we need to go deeper. And for my generation, growing up in the immediate aftermath of the Shoah, the trauma was enough. That was for me. I didn't need anything more than the Holocaust. My kids are not there, and we need we need positive forms of Jewish identity. And that's not, it shouldn't be that hard for us to figure this out. We have 4,000 years to draw on, and Jewish history didn't begin in 1933. So yeah, I think that's one of the great challenges for your generation. And I'm sorry to put this on you, but to really try to figure out why this story, again, why this matters, why bother if it's only about threat. Right after the Shoah, my father did not want to have anything to do with Jewish identity. He didn't want to have Jewish children, and his reasoning was, who needs this? It was a perfectly logical conclusion for Jews to reach after the Holocaust. And many Jews did, especially in the Jews who stayed, let's say in Poland, or the Jews who could have gotten out of Eastern Europe. I'm not speaking about the Soviet Union, where obviously it wasn't possible to leave. But after the war, the Jews who chose to stay in Poland or in Czechoslovakia, many of those Jews made the decision, who needs this anymore? If it's only about threat, then I'm going to do my children and grandchildren a big favor and not tell them that they're Jews. But we really need to figure out beyond threat why this story matters. Now, I saw a question from Linda, which, Ilya, with your permission, I would like to address. It's a very good question, which is that I say we've overcome trauma, and yet Linda notes quite correctly that have we really overcome the trauma? The trauma in many ways is with us. And that's certainly true for us as individuals. As a people, I would argue that that Jews in Israel and Jews in America, and I'm not speaking about other parts of the diaspora, which I unfortunately know much less, but certainly Israel and the United States. I think that if you look at young Israelis and young American Jews, I don't see deep Holocaust trauma. Young Israelis have lots of trauma that have to do with the army. It has to do with war and terrorism. And there is a residue, of course there's a residue of Holocaust trauma. But I think that as a whole, given the fact that this happened only 75 years ago, I think we're a remarkably healthy people. And the fact that the Jewish people did not go mad after the Shoah, and most Jews did not go mad, even most survivors. I mean, most survivors are all a little bit mad in my experience, but basically many of them, maybe even most of them, learned how to function and were able to function in more or less in normal society. And Dr. Amsel, I'm wondering if you would have something to add on this.
Let's see if Dr. Amsel, would you like to add to that? We can unmute Dr. Amsel, Larry Amsel. Let's see if there he is. Go ahead.
Firstly, hello, Yossi, and hello, Ilya, and thank you both for being such wonderful advocates for our people. Thank you both for that. That's first of all. Second of all, I would say it's really fascinating, since my academic life is around trauma. That's the research that I do, and it's very interesting, Yossi, because as a psychiatrist, I should have made these connections wrong, but I never make them quite as deeply as I should have. But I realize that my whole career is based on my reaction, as yours is yours, my reaction to trauma, right? By going into the field of trauma. And I always said, no, it somehow just happened. But of course it is. And I do agree with you. I'll have to send you my book, which is about worldwide reactions to different traumas. I think the Armenian people are somewhat
Love to
similar
see
to
it.
us. And
What is it
and
called? Larry, what's the book called?
I'll send it's called this International Perspective on Disaster and Children's Mental Health. And we have contributions from like 50 different disasters. I'll send you the PDF of the book. So I think the book is evidence that a lot of different peoples have struggled with a lot of different traumas with more or less success. And I would agree with you that as far as resilience is concerned, I think we definitely have scars. It would be terrible if we didn't have scars. But I think overall, as a psychiatrist, I have to say this: our people has done incredibly well with mental health in the wake of the Holocaust. And I wondered today, for the first time, whether that is connected to some other aspect, whether our resilience, as you bring it up, our resilience in the face of trauma is also connected to other aspects of the uniqueness of the Jewish people culturally. And one last point I want to make is what I find so tragic in America. I mean, I'm a yeshiva kid, so I actually got a very powerful yeshiva education. But the young generation now, and it's not their fault, and I think Barry Weiss has pointed this out, the young generation now doesn't have very much to call on. Most young Jews who write about being Jewish, write about their attitude of being Jewish, they haven't read a page of Maimonides. They don't even know what Jewish culture is. And what a powerful and deep culture we have, and how rich it is. And so that's I think that's another point, and I think that would go a long way towards your I think this absolutely brilliant shift. I have to give it to you, yes, the absolute brilliant shift of shifting from the trauma to the resilience. I think looking back at our cultural productivity over 2,000 years would help with that.
Thank you. Thanks, Larry.
Thank you, Professor Emzel. And there's a great segue then, of course, we always do as Jews, to our wonderful Andrew Hakimian, who is a Baruch student here at CUNY, who connects his identity. He's one of our Persian Jews in the Great Neck community, and the idea of a diaspora and how our young people connect. Andrew, go ahead.
Sure. I just want to make sure you guys can hear me. Hi, Yossi. Thank you very much for this. This is a great thing I've been hearing from you. It's all very interesting. I just had one question. From my experiences just throughout the course of my life, as short as it's been, when you meet with a lot of Jews in America and sometimes in other countries outside of Israel, they don't have a connection to their roots in Israel. They don't sort of yearn for Zion in the way that we say in our books and in our Torah and all that stuff. They don't have that connection that some people do to say like, oh, I have a deep love for Israel because it's like connected to my Jewish people and I feel it in my heart, in my soul, in my neshama, whatever you want to call it. They're just sort of people who are Jews who live in America or in another country and don't really care about all that stuff over there. To them, it's like, oh, I'm just a Jew. My mom was a Jew. Her mom was a Jew, yada, yada, yada. I do Passover. I do Yom Kippur. I do this. I do that. And it's just sort of our culture. But what does it matter to me about the history of Israel and the conflict over there 5,000 miles away? To talk about an Israeli narrative and identity to people like that, I don't think it works, to be completely honest. I don't think you connect to people like that. So how do you reach a sort of large population that just really doesn't seem to care all that much or have much of a connection to a sort of Am Yisrael, if you want to call it that?
Look, I don't, my short answer to you is I don't know. My longer answer to you is that I'm not sure that that's the right question for me and for my generation. I'll tell you what I mean. The way that Jewish education, continuity, the transmission of the Jewish story has worked through history is that each generation tells the next generation about its own Jewish experiences and its Jewish values and why being Jewish matters to them. In my generation, we seem to have lost the ability to do that. And I don't look to your generation for the problem. The problem is in my generation. And it seems to me that one of the roots of that problem is that something that began with my generation that I don't think ever happened before is we began to ask, how do we make this story relevant to young Jews? When my father wanted to tell me about his story and why being Jewish mattered to him, he didn't stop and think, how am I going to make my son who's growing up in 1960s America with drugs and rock and roll, and how am I going to make Europe of the 1940s relevant to him? He just told me his story. And that's what Jews always did. Jews told their children their story. You shall tell your children your story. And so what I'm trying to do as a writer is not ask that question, not how do I get them to understand, but how do I tell my Jewish experience, why being Jewish is important to me in the best way that I can. And then they'll do with it whatever they want. Some will take it up, some will reject it. Some may reject it now and have no interest in it, and 20 or 30 years from now, pick up on it. You know, Jewish identity is a very fluid thing. And one of the things that really makes me an optimist about the future of the Jewish people is the experience of Soviet Jews. You know, I signed up with Glenn Richter for the Soviet Jewry movement in 1965. And I'm mentioning that date because it was before the Six-Day War of 1967, before the Leningrad trials of 1970, 71. And most Soviet Jews appeared to be lost to the Jewish people. That was the perception before the Six-Day War. The Six-Day War, of course, galvanized Jewish identity in the Soviet Union. Most Jews, young Jews, seemed to be more lost to the Jewish people than most young American Jews are today. If you ask young American Jews, are you proud to be Jewish? The overwhelming majority will say yes. They may not know why, but look at the latest Pew report. Close to 95% of American Jews say they're proud to be Jewish. So my job, the job of my generation, is to try to explain to them why they should be proud to be Jewish. You're proud, but here's the reason why. And the fact that Soviet Jewry, which was lost to the Jewish people or seemed to be lost 2 generations ago, and today is an essential part of the Jewish people. There is no Jewish people today without former Soviet Jews. I encounter, when I go speak on campuses around the US, the most active kids in Hillel are the children of Israelis, the children of former Soviet Jews, and the children of Persians. This is the core in many campuses. And that's a really strong core. And so I actually feel a great deal of, maybe optimism is the wrong word, certainly hope.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So I want to connect a question from before to, and I want to ask Maor, who is calling us from Haifa. And I want to connect Linda's earlier question when she talked about the internal threat, right? Possibly like nationalism on both sides of your perspectives of the narratives that you have shared and you've written about. And I wanted to ask Maor, to ask you his question about, the Palestinian narrative and how nationalism and in his view and about human rights of Palestinians and how, and what you think about it. Maor, go ahead. Unmute Maor. Yep.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Maor. I'm from Israel. So sometimes I find it difficult to answer to Palestinian advocates because in Israel we are the strong side, and it's hard to give it's hard to explain my side when the weak side is them, and it's like, why do I don't have the right for movement for people who live in Yehuda and Shomron, and I don't know what to say. I was a combat soldier in the army, and I saw people that, I mean, they're supposed to be my enemy, but it's just civilians that I didn't know what to do with them, and I felt sorry for them because at the end they're not like, they are the regular people, and they're the people that I feel bad for them, and I don't know what to say when someone asks me why I can't move in the country. And so I don't know how to answer. I don't know how to advocate for Israel in some, like, on some aspects.
So I really appreciate the question, Maor, and that's the question that I live with, and I think many of us here live with that question. And one of the main criticisms that my book received, and this is related very much to your question, is how can you, as an Israeli, as part of the occupier, the strong side, how can you expect your Palestinian neighbor to be interested in your narrative? Why should a Palestinian care about your story? And my answer to that is that most Israeli Jews don't feel guilty about the occupation. And the reason we don't feel guilty about it is because most of us believe that we really tried to end the conflict, that we offered the Palestinians a fair deal in 1947, in the year 2000, in 2009, under Ehud Olmert. We made serious offers for a two-state solution, and the Palestinian leadership said no. And so you can't keep rejecting offers and never coming up with an offer of your own and expect Israelis to feel guilty. I don't want Israelis to feel guilty. But what I do want is for us to ask the question that you're asking now. In other words, not to do, an al-chet, because this is a very complicated conflict. And I do believe that the Palestinian leadership bears a major share of responsibility. We're not innocent either, because when I say that we made fair offers in the past, for the last 12 years, we haven't made a serious offer to the Palestinians. Even if we were to make an offer, I don't believe that the Palestinian leadership would accept it. But we still, as the strong side, we do have the responsibility to keep making a credible offer. And they can keep rejecting it, and that can remind us about why we're still sitting there as occupiers. Now, after the second Intifada in the early 2000s, for those who are not Israelis, the period of the suicide bombings between 2000 and 2005, which followed Israel's offer to the Palestinians for statehood, most of the Israeli left collapsed. And, in the 1990s, I was a guilty Israeli. I felt guilty about the occupation. I had served in Gaza, and I felt that we're not offering the Palestinians any way out. And then came the second Intifada, and I said, no more guilt. I'm not guilty. If these people want peace, then let them make us an offer. And that was my position for many years. It's not my position anymore, because too much time has gone by since the second Intifada. And we need to start looking again at what's happening in the territories. And we need to start asking ourselves some hard questions. What is the future going to be? What how do we see a way out of this? And one of the reasons that I wrote this book is for an Israeli conversation to happen. And the book, by the way, has just come out in Hebrew, came out a few weeks ago, Michtavim L'Shachen Falastini, and it's Carmel publisher. And I hope that Israelis will read it and start a debate over these questions, exactly the question that you're raising. And what I'm really trying to say to you, Maor, is that there are no easy answers. When the left says it's all our fault, that's too easy. When the right says none of it is our fault, that's also too easy. So let's start having a conversation again. You know, in the 1990s in Israeli society, we had a very big debate here about the future of the territories. But since the Second Intifada, we stopped talking about it. And what I want my book to do, what I hope it will accomplish in Israel, is help us start speaking about this again. So I'm really glad that you and other Israelis are on this call. And thank you.
Go ahead, Maor. You wanted to continue, or you're good?
I don't want to take more time, but like the last question is, do you think that Israelis are involved? Like right now, I see a lot of Jewish people outside of the country, but I feel like that inside of the country, a lot of people are kind of, I don't know how to say it in English, but anashim adishim. They're indifferent for the situation.
Apathetic, yeah.
Yeah.
Look, you know, we live under so much pressure here, and people have a limit to how much they can absorb. I actually don't think that Israelis are apathetic. I think that they push certain questions aside. Many people do, and again, I understand why. But I think that compared to other societies, we are much more engaged with our questions than you'll find in many other countries in the West. I think we're a very connected. I think we're a very connected society.
Thank you, Maor. And I wanted to jump to Jordan, who has a very interesting question about, you know, if we are disconnected completely from Judaism and those values, and the idea that Professor Amsel was speaking about. What is our core? Can Jordan jump in and ask his question? Is Jordan be here? Or I'll ask it for him. The hope is that, you know,
Jordan's unmuted now.
He's unmuted.
Yes.
Jordan.
Never mind.
Jordan, go ahead. Or I'll jump in. No worries. The whole idea about if one does not have a connection to Jewish history, tradition, the Torah, the things that Andrew and Professor Amsel were talking about, how can, if there is none of that basis, and possibly none, you know, the desire to yearn for Israel is not there, what is left? How do we connect those folks? And if we say Torah, the wisdom of our you know, patriarchs and matriarchs is the whole story. If you don't have the connection or don't care about it, what can we do? Where can we start?
So Jordan is adding, many Jews in America have become Buddhists. I love Buddhism. I wouldn't call myself a Buddhist, but I certainly have a strong relationship to it. And I'm only half joking, because I think that identity today is very fluid. And I agree that if you have no relationship with Judaism, no relationship with Israel, no relationship to Jewish peoplehood, there's not a lot left. On the other hand, I'm very reluctant to dismiss the Jewish identity, however tenuous, of any Jew, because any connection is a basis on which to build a richer and more robust Jewish identity. We too often in the Jewish community, we dismiss the Jewishness of the other. And, you know, for me, I do have red lines. My red line is Jewish anti-Zionism. If you are going to deny our right to be a nation, to be a sovereign state, you are cutting yourself off from one of the essential elements of Jewish vitality, one of the essential elements that allowed us to recover from the 20th century. Thanks to the state of Israel, the Soviet Jewry became renewed. It was only because of the state of Israel, and the pride and inspiration that Soviet Jews felt after the Six-Day War and how that developed, and so that's only one example. Thanks to the state of Israel, the Jews of the Arab world, of the Muslim world, have a safe refuge. I mean, can you imagine if there were still large Jewish communities in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, Lebanon? These would be Jewish communities living with existential threat today. And so Israel really saved the Jewish people. And to be anti-Zionist is to negate the source of our salvation. So my red line is opposition to Israel's legitimacy. Anything other than that, you know, after 200 years of modernity, of Holocaust and assimilation and enforced assimilation in the Soviet Union, uprooting, 90% of the world's Jews today live in places that are in countries that are different from their great-grandparents. We are a people that has gone through major and multiple upheavals. And so rather than judge each other as being inadequate Jews, I think we need to embrace each other's Jewishness, celebrate each other's Jewishness, which is not a natural Jewish tendency. The natural Jewish tendency is to point at each other and say, you're a bad Jew. You're betraying Judaism. And that, I think, is not the way for a survivor people to treat each other and itself.
Thank you. I want to give another huge voice here to Jay Adler, who's my friend and my new friend. I'm very excited to always learn from Jay and his wonderful question about liberal democracy and the Western world. Go ahead, Jay.
Thank you first, Yossi, for a very compelling and thought-provoking afternoon. It's been an excellent experience. I think clearly one answer to the question I'm about to ask is, are unique qualities of Jewish history and experience that you've already referred to, this multi-millennial endurance that's hard to find a likeness for elsewhere in human culture. But I'll read the question as I posed it in the chat, which is, how much would you attribute challenges to continuing Jewish identity in the diaspora to the general nature of modern secular liberal democracy? Is this challenge to some degree the same as it has been to different religious traditions, different ethno-nationalist traditions, the diminution of ethno-nationalist identity in Europe, the challenges to Catholicism in terms of the way people actually live out their religious faith? Unique aspects to it as well, but do you think that a significant amount of it is this general condition that didn't exist for the most part before the Second World War?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And what makes it even more complicated in the Jewish context is that we're not only talking about preserving religious traditions or ethnic identities, but a global peoplehood. And that does run counter to the spirit of the times in the West. On the other hand, globalization creates offers us an opportunity to present Jewish peoplehood as a model for kind of a trans-border identity with a homeland at the center, but with a people that is very comfortable functioning in a global context. You know, as you were speaking, I was thinking about the long Jewish tradition of being naysayers. The Jews are history's great opponents, great oppositionists. We produced a messianic figure who was adopted by half the world. And then we said, no, that's not, he's actually not the guy we're waiting for. And they said, very reasonably, but he's one of you. He came to you. And we said, no, not that. And then we paid the price for 2,000 years. And we kept saying no. So anyone who is any Ashkenazi alive today is the descendant of very stubborn people, of people who for 2,000 years refused to accept a Jewish Messiah. In the Muslim world, we were also stubborn. You know, Muhammad initially tried to lure the Jews into Islam by making Jerusalem rather than Mecca the center point, and any descendant today of Jews from Arab countries, any Mizrahi today, is a descendant of also very stubborn people who said no. And you know, the Rambam, Maimonides, called Islam the purest form of monotheism, and yet the Jews under Islam said we'd rather be second class, we'd rather live in humiliation than be part of this beautiful monotheism, which it is. So we are a people that and it's built into our name. You know, when Abraham is called Ha'ivri, the Hebrew, and the rabbis say that the word Ivri comes from the root Ever, which means the other bank, the other side. Abraham stood on one side of the river, and the whole of the idolatrous world stood on the other side. And that's where we come from. Now, modernity, the modern West, poses a very complicated challenge to us, because it is a system that offers us complete equality, complete acceptance. Christianity didn't. We had to assimilate on its terms. Islam didn't. The modern West is offering us unlimited acceptance. We can be as Jewish or as non-Jewish as we prefer. And so it's very hard for us to resist this system. It's very hard for us to stand in opposition to aspects of the liberal West. In many ways, we owe our post-Holocaust recovery to the liberal West. And I'm just posing this as a series of questions that I have. At what point do we need to say to the liberal West, yes, we share certain values. We don't share every value. What are the values we don't share with the liberal West? What still defines the Jews as standing on the other side? And I don't have an answer to that, but I know that that's a really important question.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Professor Adler. calling all the way from California. So we're almost out of time. Just before I give Yossi the last word, as he didn't in his book, in his epilogue, I would just like to first thank all of our friends who are here from St. Petersburg, from Haifa, from our wonderful I Lounge Fellowship. And I want to plug very quickly that we have amazing talks coming up, one on November 16th with Carrie Nelson, which will be extraordinary, and we will send that out. And as well, another on November 23rd with Yaakov Nagen and Khalid Abu Awad, which will be an incredible conversation. So please come and be there with us. And just for last word, Yossi, we are on campuses, many of us, most of us, in the diaspora, most of us. So you've been there. You are a Brooklyn boy who has been there during that time on our campuses. But it's a different world now. But what is your advice? Where do we start? Where do we go from here? What would you say is our first step now to ignite this diaspora and connect us?
I think the first step is to own our story, to stand in our story. My definition of the Jews, and maybe this is a writer's definition, is that we are a story. The Jews are a story. We're a story that we tell ourselves about who we think we are. And that's why the most important Jewish ritual that unites most Jews is actually not fasting on Yom Kippur, but attending a Seder, because it's at the Seder where we try to unpack the meaning of our origins, the meaning of this 4,000-year story. In our time, our story is under growing assault, the legitimacy of our story. One of the core elements of our story is our attachment to the land of Israel, and it's that part of our story that is under assault. That's the part of our story that held us together as a people for 2,000 years, and that allowed us to heal from the traumas of the 20th century. And so we need to defend that story. But I would say that this assault on our story, which I consider, by the way, a far greater threat to Jewish well-being than coming from the far right. I see the progressive anti-Zionist assault on the Jewish story as the greatest threat that we're facing in this generation. But I also see it as an opportunity, because it's allowing us to have conversations like this. And too often in Jewish life, we talk about other things. We have political disagreements, and those are important to have. We have our religious arguments. We don't know how to speak about our story. And that's what we need to start doing. We need to become kind of amateur historians. We need to really immerse in our story, in our family stories. We need to, I think, really own our own personal Jewish stories, but also try to figure out together what our story means. And again, that's not only my responsibility as a writer, it's all of our responsibilities. And one last word. I'm very often asked when I speak to older Jewish audiences, why are we doing so badly in presenting our Israel's case? Why does the other side have such an easy time of it? And my answer is, the Palestinian argument can be reduced to 4 or 5 words. Ethnic cleansing, apartheid, genocide, colonialism. And those are really powerful words, especially in today's discourse, and even more especially on campus. And in an era of social media, all you need are a few words. A hashtag. Save Sheikh Jarrah. The hashtag Save Sheikh Jarrah went around 500 million times. Now, on our side, we have a story. Well, in 1947, we accepted partition and they didn't. In the year 2000, we made you're dead. As soon as you start talking about 1947, while the other side has 4 evocative words, in this time, you're finished. And so what we need to do, and this is my last point, are two things. We do need to learn how to function in this new world of social media, where we also have 4 or 5 words that we can push back on. But that's only a Band-Aid. The deeper challenge that we're facing is to realize that there's really no other way for us to be as a people than to be with our story. And yes, our story is complicated, and it takes a long time to tell our story, and people don't have patience for that. And so for those people, we need the 5 words. But in our own internal Jewish conversation, we need to start deepening the story. And that's the real counterintuitive move in an era of social media. And I certainly do say that as a writer of books, sometimes long books, and realizing that I'm counterintuitive to this time. But as a people, we are a counterintuitive people. And it begins with owning our story.
Amazing. Yossi, thank you. On a beautiful note, you're ending us off in an amazing way. I just want to pitch again the letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, the latest amazing work by Yossi Klein Halevi.
But Ilya, please, if you could tell people, or I'll say it, the paperback edition, which has an epilogue of Palestinian responses.
Yes, that's the one we're sending to students. So so it's terrific. And we're very lucky to have had you here with us. And there was a really rich, incredible conversation in chat also, by the way, going on simultaneously, which was incredible. So I'm very lucky to have seen folks be so engaged in the conversation that you've led.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. I really enjoyed engaging with you. Linda, thank you for bringing my book to your reading circle. And wonderful to meet you all. And thank you, Ilya, as always.
Thank you. Okay, friends, we'll see you soon. Hang out with us, and we'll be back November 16th, Gary Nelson, November 23rd, for a great conversation again. Please be in touch, and we will continue to learn together throughout this semester. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for our CAFE members, CUNY Alliance for Inclusion, amazing group of faculty who are doing incredible work to stand up to opponents in our campuses. So thank you, friends. We'll see you all soon. Thank you, students from all around the world. We'll see you. Thank you so much. Bye, friends. Bye, Yossi. Thank you so much. Thank you, friends. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Well, we can stop recording, I guess. Bye, Yael. See you soon.